Welcome to Legacy Conversations, a channel where we preserve military memories and history.
Hello, Internet. I'm excited. Yes, I am. I've been waiting for this conversation for quite a long time, and I really have to thank our guest, Colonel Trevor Ralston. You people would have seen him at experimental helicopter as well as Rooivalk, where he was the test pilot. And I just want to say to you people, there might be a few little dogs barking there in the background, and that's a good thing. Let me tell you, there was a fellow policeman, the detectives, he wrote a report about 20 years ago in South Africa called the Zin Report, Dr. Zin. And what he did is, as a detective, of course, he used to arrest all these criminal gangs who attack you in your house. And he went out afterwards and he said to them, guys, you're in jail, you're going to die in jail. Tell me, what's your modus operandi? And he came up with a lot of things which are very fascinating, like 80% of the time they attack you, it is actually an inside job. It's either your mate or it's your gardener or there's somebody who knows you. Sometimes even your child, if he wants to inherit, we're setting me up to do these things. It's not to say always if it's a mate of a gardener that it's done because they want to do it, but because simply they might be blackmailed, there might be some force involved here. And interesting in this stands to this, David. One thing these criminals are really, really scared of is a little dog inside the house. Because they can't get past that dog. That dog will wake you up and then you can take whatever precautions. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Sir, I'm so glad you're here. Can you tell me, how did you end up in the SAF? What happened? How do you even become a test pilot? I understand also your dad, your late father was a naval officer. So I'm wondering, well, you tell the story. I'll keep quiet.
Well, thank you very much, Koos. Nice seeing you again, and thank you very much for the welcome. Before I go any further, I'd like to just thank you for all your work on Legacy Conversations in trying to keep the history of South Africa for the future generations. It's a hard job that you do, and I think there are many, many people who really do appreciate it. So to answer your question, my dad, he wasn't a naval officer, he was an Air Force officer, actually. And where I grew up was at Central Flying School at Donota, where my dad was an instructor. So I spent my primary school days at Central Flying School Donota. That's on the east rand of Gauteng. And I grew up literally with the sound of Harvards flying in the air. And because of my dad's profession, as an instructor as he was then, I think it was pretty natural that I drifted towards wanting to fly. It was always my ambition. It takes quite a lot of persuasion one way or another to actually get there. I left school and I went straight to the Air Force Gymnasium, the South African Air Force Gymnasium, near to Air Force Base Squadron, as it used to be in those days. After basic training, basic kind of army training, just to get the recruits all bashed into shape, as it were, the request came for those who wanted to become pilots. So I obviously applied and went through the whole selection process. Now, in those days, there was a huge demand from the guys having left school to want to go and fly. The SAF was a very attractive proposition. And also the SAF at that stage was building up in terms of numbers. So the selection bunch was something like 2,000 to 3,000 people who applied for this. And after all the testing that selection boards and so on that we went through, there was a group of 132 pupil pilots selected. We then went off to CFS Donota, my old primary school day venue, as it were, and we started our training. This was in 1967, where I started pilot training. That course lasted for just over a year. I got my wings in February 1968, And those who did well on the course were given the option of choosing which line they would prefer to go into: helicopters, transport, fighter, whatever. Now, interesting, my instructor was an ex-helicopter guy. And he said to me, you know what, there's only one thing to do, that's go fly helicopters. They're a challenge, they're different, very interesting. So I took his advice. And I guess that's one of the major turning points in my life, not turning points, but very important forks in the road, that I went off into the helicopter line. I've never regretted it, I must say. My colleagues always said, why didn't you go to fighters? Well, I'm pleased I didn't. I would have liked to, but that's the way it turned out. And it was a great career, which I'll get on to as we talk along. So I think it was around April 1968, a group of us then left for Air Force Base Easterplaat, where the helicopter conversion unit was based, and we started our helicopter conversions. I think there were 8 of us on the course, and we started on the Alouette 2. We flew, I think, about 40 hours in the Alouette 2, and then we progressed to the Alouette 3. We did another, I can't remember how many, probably 80 hours or so, after which we were approved, qualified helicopter pilots, and were then sent off to Air Force Base Squadron at 17 Squadron, which flew Alouettes. So I spent about 4 years, I think, on Alouettes. Did a couple of tours in the bush, up in Rundu area, and also one tour in the then Rhodesia, which was fascinating, really nice. The tours were great. What a life it was, seeing the world south of the equator in Africa. And at some stage, around about end of 69, there was a call for those who would be interested in progressing to the Super Freelon helicopter. These were pretty new. They'd only been in service with the South African Air Force for maybe 2 years at that stage. And of course, something new to me, and the helicopter line is always interesting. So I put up my hand and went off to fly at 15 Squadron at Air Force Base Squadron. That was a lovely squadron to be on. It was like a guided tour of South Africa at low level, so it was fantastic. I spent a good number of years there. I think I accumulated eventually some 1,200 hours on the Super Freelon, which is a lovely helicopter. It's got a lot of shortcomings in hot and high conditions, but apart from that, a lot of very great attributes. Lovely flying, lovely time of my life. I then, as happens to most serving South African Air Force officers, at some stage or other you get roped in to go off to do instructor's course. So for me, it was back to Central Flying School Denotta on the Harvards again. This was about 1974, where I did instructor's course, which was also very enjoyable. Back to flying fixed wings, lovely. But then as my interest in helicopters became noticed, I was very active on 15 Squadron in the maintenance test flying activities. And I kind of put my hand up that I would very much like to get into test flying in more depth. So luckily, and my life has been really surfing a lovely, very fortunate wave onto the shore. I was then taken off instruction, and I was seconded to 19 Squadron at Swartkop. They were flying Pumas, and I was mainly responsible for production testing of new Puma and Alouette helicopters. We did all that testing at Snake Valley next to Swartkop. So that kept me busy for about 2 years. And then towards the end of 1976, I was told to get ready for going to the Empire Test Pilot School, Boscombe Down in the United Kingdom. All very short notice, but my wife and I and my young daughter then set heading for Boscombe Down and in the UK, which was a thrill, challenge, and I was so grateful to be able to get that slot on the course. I might add that before that actually happened, in those days it was pretty sensitive, but now I guess nothing is sensitive anymore from those days. I was seconded to DCA, the Department of Transport Division Civil Aviation, so that I could be granted, earn an airline transport license on helicopters, which was a prerequisite for going across to Boscombe Down. I actually didn't go as a South African Air Force officer. I was seconded to DCA as a helicopter pilot going on to the course. So if you look at the records of Boscombe Down, you'll see that recorded on the trophy winners is a Mr. Ralston from DCA. Okay, so that course at Boscombe Down was probably one of the highlights of my life. It was an amazing challenge, worked like I've never had to do before, kind of 24 hours a day for a year. Very challenging, but so satisfying. I was on the helicopter side of the course, and the course is run with fixed wing test pilots or students, rotary wing test pilot students, and then flight test engineers from helicopter and fixed wing. So primarily flew helicopters, but also as part of the rounding off, if you like, of test pilots, we were given a lot of time on fixed wing aircraft. Well, I say a lot, not really a lot, but good exposure. So, and this is where my jet jockey friends, my fighter pilot friends, they drool with that, with envy when I say, you know, we got to fly the Lightning and the Hunter and the Jet Provost and so on, which were fantastic experiences. Not as a pilot in command, obviously, but we were given huge exposure, and we had to do some exercises on each of those aircraft. There was also a variable stability light twin aircraft called the Scottish Aviation Basset, which was modified so that they could set up characteristics which would resemble a fighter aircraft, a transport aircraft, nimble, not so nimble type of flying, which we then had to evaluate. On the helicopter side, I got to fly a number, Bell 47, the Sea King, the Westland, Mark 3, Mark 5, the Scout, and so on. So the exposure was very good. I worked my butt off on the course, and I managed to achieve one of the first helicopter pilots who came out on top of the whole course. So I won the Westland Trophy for the best helicopter test pilot, and also the McKenna Trophy, which is awarded to the best student overall, including all the fixed wing guys. So that was quite a feather in my cap, and I owe that success to the superb training that the SAF and the training and preparation that I got in the South African Air Force. That was an end of a most interesting and challenging part of my life, and I was then transferred to the South African Air Force Test Flying Unit, which is called TFDC, Test Flight and Development Center, which is based at Air Force Base Waterkloof. That was in 1978. I then did a number of tasks at that unit. And that's where I first became involved in the preparations for what eventually turned out into the Rooivalk attack helicopter. There was a lot of work to be done defining the needs, and that's where the fairly limited operational experience that I had, and also chatting with colleagues, we started defining what would be required in a attack helicopter similar to the Rooivalk. So that defined what weaponry it would take to perform the task that we had in mind. A lot of work done on defining, for example, the cockpit layout, the ergonomics, and all these activities together with people at Air Force headquarters, the project officers, led to the development of, let's call it a requirement, in which the main features of the aircraft were put into place and specified in more detail. In parallel with that, and as a team building and capability demonstration effort, the work started on the what was called the XD1, the experimental XH1 rather, the Alpha attack helicopter model, put it that way, which was based on the Alouette but had the appearance of an attack helicopter. Now, this whole work was done at the National Institute of Aeronautics and Technology at Aeronautics Systems and Technology at CSIR, under the leadership of Dr. Paul Potgieter, where the team successfully led to the development and flight of the Alpha XH1. I think some of the viewers might have seen that short video on the XH1 that was done recently. So that then gave the South African Air Force the confidence that they needed to say to industry, right, you go ahead and go towards full-scale development and production of the Rooivalk attack helicopter. This happened mostly at TFDC, and then a couple of things happened in parallel. The first one was that TFDC was planned to move from Air Force Base Waterkloof to their new base at Overberg in the Cape. That was, I must get my dates right here. It was probably 1984, somewhere around there. I'm not absolutely sure of it. It doesn't matter too much. So that was one thing. And then the other was that at that stage, because of the development on the Rooivalk program, Atlas Aircraft Corporation, which was based at Johannesburg International Airport, were moving towards a point where they needed a test pilot on board the program, which was run at that stage by Atlas Aircraft Corporation. So with the impending move from TFDC and the offer from Atlas Aircraft, I took the leap and I left the Air Force, well, on a transfer originally. So I retained my South African Air Force officer status and worked for a number of years under that arrangement until around about 1989, where I finally decided that the typical SAF career officer path for me was probably running out, and I elected to jump full-time into test flying, so I joined Atlas Aircraft Corporation. I guess to cut a long story a little bit short, the activities there really became very focused, very busy. We built up a flight test organization from a fairly small organization, which was primarily at that stage involved in production test flying of the Impala aircraft. We had to expand quite considerably to accommodate experimental type testing, not just production testing. So we expanded the whole organization, the flight test department at Atlas Aircraft to, eventually about 80 people were on the team. I then became manager of that flight test department. So bearing two hats really, one the chief test pilot and also the manager of the unit, and also busy with the development of the Rooivalk. And also, not only the Rooivalk, but part of the program, the Atlas acquired two Puma helicopters. 189 and 190 were their serial numbers, their tail numbers, which were used as development platforms for the Rooivalk. So one was primarily used for weapons testing, and the other was primarily used for avionics systems testing. So typically, there were wings mounted through the airframe on both to give it the attack helicopter look. I had a turret sight in the front. We fitted a cannon under the belly. A lot of autopilot testing was done. Since autopilot testing or autopilot functionality was a very important part of the Rooivalk attributes to ease the workload of the pilot, particularly at low level. So those were fascinating days as well, flying the Pumas. A lot of initial tests done with weapons, firing the Ingwe missile, which at that stage was called the ZT-3 at St. Lucia. A lot of cannon testing, and as I said, avionics, weapons, and development of some of the initial tactics or flight profiles that would probably be needed as we envisaged to perform the role of the attack helicopter. This led then to finally getting the Rooivalk prototype, XDM, up and running. The first flight was in 1990 in February. And from there on, the activities focused on developing the Rooivalk, both structurally, dynamically, instrumentation or avionics-wise, to be able to fulfill the role that it was designated to do. Where do I go from here, Koos? I guess the continuation of that Rooivalk program included a lot of overseas demonstrations, a lot of attendance of air shows. We went to Farnborough, we went to Middle Wallop, we went to Dubai, we went to Langkawi in Malaysia. There was a tour in Australia. There was another demonstration in Algeria. And all these were hugely expensive and quite demanding from the whole Rooivalk team. But lovely days, never to be forgotten, lots of experience, lots of excitement, and so on. And people will probably ask, why was there an emphasis placed on doing helicopter aerobatics, where the Rooivalk did perform rolls and loops and various other maneuvers? The aeroplane was never designed operationally to be able to do these maneuvers. However, from the marketing perspective, there was quite a push to become competitive with the Apache, which was probably in most markets the chief competitor. So it was decided that we would develop these maneuvers in order to show some sort of success and excitement at the air shows. So a lot of work was done on the XDM in developing the loop and the roll and various other similar maneuvers. But that was done on a specially instrumented aeroplane, and it was extremely well controlled. So people think that, the Rooivalk in service can do these maneuvers. Yes, it can. However, the damage to the components is not part of the general usage that was required of the airplane. So just not possible from the flight envelope point of view, the approved flight envelope point of view, and it was purely for demonstration and marketing purposes. That then, I suppose, in one way or another, when the aircraft became ready for production, I then started looking around again, because a lot of the excitement was over in terms of the helicopter Rooivalk development. I must add, actually, that during this time there was also a lot of work done at this facility on the Oryx development and certification, which we did together with French Aerospatiale in those days. So we had a team out here from them, and we worked together on the development, the new engines, new rotor blades, new gearbox, and so on. That was also a very interesting interlude, leading to the Oryx becoming mature enough to go into production. I was then, that's at about 2005, 2004, I was made an offer by Advanced Technologies and Engineering based in Halfway House, Midrand, Johannesburg. They were very deeply involved in the Rooivalk mission computer and a whole lot of avionics development. And they'd taken that expertise and were looking to develop, retrofit other helicopters with this equipment. So they made me an offer, and I thought, let's move on to fresh pastures, which I did in 2005, moved across to ATE. We started a big program on the Mi-24, the Hind helicopter, which was kitted out avionics and weapons-wise, fairly similar fashion to the Rooivalk. So that occupied me and the team that we built up in ATE at that stage as well for a good number of years. We did a lot of work in Algeria. Where were the other places? Azerbaijan, marketing efforts in Georgia, etc., which kept us busy and very fascinating work to do as well. They then moved on to other helicopters. My final one there was a joint development with Eurocopter, France, on upgrading the EC-135 for a customer, also including weapon systems and avionics. And that really rounded off my, let's say, 50-year flying career, and I resigned at the age of 68, a good couple of years ago, 8 years ago, and that's where I am today. So, of course, I don't know whether that is sufficient or any holes in that, any questions that might arise from that. You're welcome to fire away.
Yeah, thank you. What a wonderful career, and I apologize for my mistake about your late father. It was not meant in disrespect. And it's fascinating to me at Legacy how the Air Force actually came to help and assist us. And you guys would have noticed right in the beginning of a video, we have our editor, Posse, who's of course from 16 Squadron. He's a flight engineer, what he was with.
Oh,
and
okay.
We've got a thing going where we say, buy him a coffee if you want to buy him a coffee for all the hours and hours he's going to spend in editing this video.
Greetings, folk. Dag sê. Thank you for joining me here for a very, very quick one. Koos and Rebecca have graciously invited me to leave you a link, wherever we put the link, to my Buy Me a Coffee page. Yes, please. If you're happy with the edit of this, or if I occasionally host a video, I'd appreciate your feedback and or you buying me a coffee, a beer, a glass of wine, or even maybe a small whiskey. But I'm going to categorically state, for the legacy conversations where this gets used, all that money is going to be reserved for a very special project, of which you will hear all about soon. So thank you very much. I do appreciate your contributions. Thank you, Donkey. Bye.
Just want to
Yeah.
remind you guys about that. It really takes a lot of time to rework the videos. I just sit there and I look pretty, man, which of course is a is an impossible task. But yeah, I think we also had, Vermaat was also a flight engineer in 1964. I think he
Oh,
did,
okay.
did the second course on the LOs.
Okay.
So he's also around. So I want to thank the Air Force SAF for coming to assist us here at Legacy and to yourself. But I have a few questions, of course, if you don't mind, if I made my list here. And then
Oh, my
after that,
goodness.
yeah, no, you'll be surprised. So I actually listen while I sit here and look like I'm not listening. But and then we'll get to the questions you guys had on the Rooivalk on that
Sure.
video. May I ask, what aircraft were your dad flying besides the Harvard?
Okay, my dad, well, he qualified initially before he joined the Air Force as a quantity surveyor. And then he became a navigator in the Air Force. And only later, I think, I can't remember exactly, his logbook's just here, I should actually look, but he did a pilot or wings course somewhere around 1946. In the war, maybe it was earlier, because I know he flew Wellingtons during the Second World War. That's what I know. So he did his training, I guess, on things like tiger moths and so on during those years. Then his next important thing that I remember, and he was always really proud of the efforts of the Berlin airlift. He was part of the South African Air Force delegation. They did a lot of flights on the Berlin airlift. And he was instrumental in trying to get one of the Dakotas associated with the Berlin airlift restored at Air Force Base Easterplaat. But after the Berlin airlift, he was shortlisted. He never did get to Korea. He was on his way and the war stopped. He then was transferred to CFS, Central Flying School, Denota, and that's where I grew up together with him. So he was an instructor there for, I guess, 6-7 years. And then they called him back into the heart of the Air Force, and he became involved in a lot of development work, the manuals for the Air Force, GWU. Some of the people will recognize that name. And he ended up, apart from Air Force headquarters, at General Headquarters, and he retired in the rank of Major General in the SAF. Yeah, so that's his very, very abbreviated and probably inaccurate dates regarding his career.
Yeah, well, I've heard about him. I suppose he was in the same time that this Monique's Roo and those people were flying as instructors.
Yes, that's right. In fact, glad you pointed that out, because my dad at one stage was OC at 4 Squadron, SWAT Corps, flying Harvards. And Monique's Roo was on his squadron. Yes, you remembered that name very well. Yeah. A lot of other, Judge Louis Veyers was on that squadron. Got to know him well as a lighty, as a small young boy. And many other very well-known citizen force pilots. Yeah.
Were these pilots kind to you people, what I may use the word military brats? Because, so many pilots say to me, Koos, it was an uncle somewhere pilot who picked me up and he showed me the cockpit, and that's where I thought.
Yes. I think that's very true. And if I could go right back to the start of the talk, on course with me and pupil pilots course, I'll try and remember them all. Sons of Air Force officers, sons of Air Force members. So there was Dave Knudsen. I think that name might ring a bell to you. He later became very involved in the SAF display team. Oh my word, Brick Bradford, Donald Baxter, and there are more. They're not coming to my tongue very quickly, but a good number were following their father's footsteps. I think that bug, once you become exposed to it, and I think all the kids of dads who flew Harvards nagged them, please, I need a flip. And once you have a flip, then you're bitten and you become part of, that becomes your destiny, I think. Eric Robbs is another guy, Brigadier General Robbs' son. Goodness me, there were a number of others that I just can't remember. But yes, your point is very valid. That happens. Yeah.
So when you were at your passing out parade to receive your wings,
Yes.
would your dad also be on the parade to hand them over, or would he be in the crowd? And would you be saluting your dad? He's a senior officer. I mean, you have to. How do you greet your dad to be
yes. Okay. Well, that's an interesting little sub-story because, my dad was kind of given, let's say, the honor of presenting me with my wings. I managed to get first place on the course. Lieutenant General Verster was the officer handing out the wings. And when I was called up, General Verster handed me my wings, and then the aide, can't remember his name, standing there, he said, "Stand fast." And General Verster apologized. My dad was then called up, and he gave me my wings. So I got them presented twice. So that was very nice, yes. Yeah. He was part of the invitees, the guest list. Everyone who graduated had the opportunity of inviting their parents and girlfriends and whatever to the parade. Of the 132 who started the course, there were, I think, 82 who actually passed out at the end of the 1 year course. So there's quite an attrition rate.
Yeah, which brings me to something now. I've been told, I think it was Captain Trevor Bernstein, something.
Yes, there's a Bernstein. Yes, Bernstein, I remember.
Yeah, he was a mod mover or something, as you people call him, flying the Mirage F1AZ. But he was also an instructor in Harvard. We have videos of him speaking about us.
Okay.
If I mispronounce his name, I do apologize. I'll rectify it, yeah.
I think it was Bernstein. I think you're right.
Yeah. Wonderful man. I think he flew for SAA.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
And he explained to me that once you have your first solo flight, you're sort of dragged out of that cockpit and thrown there into a mud bath or something, and sort of almost drowned.
It's a typical, it's a tradition, really. I think after your first solo flight, they pour water over you or do something, just as a silly gesture of congratulations.
But would they do that for you who comes first as well? But of course, at that stage, you don't know you're going to come first. You just know you're going to solo.
No, you haven't a clue. No. So, yeah, that only came later. Just told it 1 or 2 days before the parade, the passing out parade. Yeah, you told your positions.
There's a question, so I'm asked quite a lot, and I don't know what's the answer, so I'm going to ask you. Is there such a thing as a natural-born helicopter or rotary wing pilot?
I don't think it's only applicable to helicopter rotor wing. I think there are definitely people who are more able to fly easily and naturally than others. I think This doesn't apply only to helicopters or fixed wing or fighters or whatever. I think anyone with that natural ability, which is a real gift, can go into any line and be successful. So a lot of people elected to go to helicopters, and they were very good pilots. They could have gone into fixed wing, they could have gone to fighters, a lot of them went to transport, but they could have made their way successfully in any line of aircraft. So, yeah, there's nothing specific about a helicopter test pilot. There's this old rivalry between the helicopter guys and the fixed wing guys, particularly the fighter guys we call the vlamgatte. You probably know that term. For those who are not familiar with Afrikaans, it's a flaming rear end, the fighter guys. So there's always been this, it's a natural thing with youngsters, there's always this competitive type of nature. And that goes with the type of person I think pilots normally are. They are competitive and by nature, and they want to do well, particularly those who are really bitten by the aviation bug. It's a challenge. Every flight is a challenge. So, yeah, you just do your best at every flight.
Yeah, it's esprit de corps, I suppose.
I beg your pardon?
I suppose it's esprit de corps, where you know,
yes,
but
exactly.
different. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing as long as it's under control. I
Yeah.
think it was Colonel Neil Ellis who said to me that when he was testing people to fly, to train them to fly there in Sierra Leone or somewhere,
Yeah.
he had these aspirant pilots there and he put them on a bicycle and they had to drive in circle 8s. He wanted to see if they have any kind of coordination of muscles. And he said those who couldn't make the circle 8, he just threw away. I mean, he didn't want them.
Well, yes, it's a good test. It reminds me of the tests we did before People Pilots course at was then Wits University. They had all sorts of demonic testing things where to test coordination a little bit more than just riding a bicycle. They had this particular machine, had a drum that you had to turn with both hands, and it had a set of pedals, and the pedals were connected to a scriber, and on this drum there was a convoluted track made of brass. So you had to turn this and with your feet keep this brass pointer on the track. And every time you went off, it gave you a hell of a shock. I don't think those kind of test methods would be approved these days, but yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, no, I'm just laughing here now. You know what I was thinking also? I do speak to the chopper people here at Legacy, and all are welcome, of course, guys. Please, if you feel you have a story, contact me, and if you don't feel you have a story, contact me anyway, because then you probably do. It's a quiet answer which we're really looking for, but it's for history, guys. It's not for me or for you, actually.
Sure.
But it was that Honoris Crux holder, Steve Coetzee, a flight engineer, who said to me, you know, Koos, to fly is one thing, but to hover is divine. And it always spoke to me. So it must be a strange feeling for you when you're up in a helicopter and you turn it left, turn it right, and you know, as long as your rotor blades don't hit something, you know, you can really circle there right around the tree if you want to.
Yeah.
Must be.
Yeah, I think these are the attributes that make helicopters so fascinating, really. Yeah.
So it's a kind of magic.
I beg your pardon?
It's a kind of magic. Would you
consider? Yes, it is. It's just very different to fixed wing flying. There's a lot more, let's say, freedom in the flight path. But anyway,
yeah. No. Well, with two sides are never going to meet, I'm sure. One will always, you know, that story of a vlamgatte of a fighter pilot is how do you know I'm flying fighters? Well, I'll tell you. But they do. I do. I remember my late wife, within 10 seconds, he said that to me. But anyway, so it was. How do you test a new helicopter, sir? What do you do with this thing? Is it like a normal flight, or do you have specific instructions you follow with this thing before you can start?
Okay. Ooh, that's a long and involved explanation. I'll try and make it fairly short. So let's take an example. Let's use the Rooivalk as an example. The first flight. It is something that is prepared in depth and in detail many months before the actual flight, and what would be developed for in a phase of a flight test program. So let's take the first phase. There'd be a flight test plan that would be constructed, which would detail the way in which the test crew, it's the flight test engineer and the test pilot, want to go about or propose going about a step-by-step incremental development of the flight envelope, which is really what it's all about. So the test plan would then be submitted to the program. The engineers associated with the program would check what we're doing to make sure that we're not potentially going to be exceeding too many limits right from the start or too soon in the program. And once that's approved, then the aeroplane is instrumented. And these sort of experimental helicopters, I think on the Rooivalk we had something like 2,000 parameters, from vibration levels, from stress, gearbox information, engine information, torque, a whole lot of parameters that are monitored in detail during the flight for selected few parameters that are critical to that particular flight. And then subsequent to each flight, the rest of those parameters are analyzed in depth to make sure that we're not progressing too quickly. So it's a very careful build-up. It's not like, I guess, in the 1940s and 50s where things were a lot more gung-ho. You look at the losses of airframes, experimental airframes in the 50s, and test pilots, test crew, the rate of accidents was huge. These days, and in the Rooivalk days, they were done much more progressively and much more controlled fashion. That's generally how it would be done for the airframe, which you've got to have the airframe flying before you can get onto the avionics. So the airframe flight envelope would be expanded to make the airframe capable of carrying the avionics and weapons, and then later stages of the program would then focus more on weapons development and avionics development. I think that's probably in a nutshell. So it's not a jump in and let's see what happens. It's a very thorough, methodical approach to making sure you don't crash. You crash the aeroplane, you crash the program, really.
Yeah, that can cost money. That can cost serious money. But I've heard a story somewhere that is how a Martin Baker ejection seats actually came to be. One of the pilots was either Martin or Baker. It's two different people. He actually died testing some kind of aircraft, and his partner decided. Yeah, I've heard that story. I don't know if it's true.
Well, the idea and development, if I'm not mistaken, of ejection seats actually started during the Second World War. The Germans had some initial, I wouldn't say rudimentary, but first level ejection seats capabilities. The pilot's life is important. It actually enables him to prosecute his task with more confidence, because he knows he has an option of getting out should he be shot down, for example, or if there's a failure on the aeroplane. So it's a vital part of those aircraft. Unfortunately, these things are not possible. Just a minute. Emma? Thank you. These things are not possible in helicopters, apart from a system that was developed for the Russian Ka-52, which is an attack helicopter with coaxial rotors, one on top of the other. And they had a rocket ejection capability for the crew, They first jettisoned all 6 rotor blades and then pulled the crew out by a rocket system. So they have been developed for helicopters. However, this was initially thought of for the Rooivalk, but it just technically became too much of a challenge, and particularly the fact that helicopters operate low level. So the way out of it was to build crashworthiness into the helicopter. And it was designed for, if I remember correctly, somewhere on 10 meters per second, a vertical crash where the crew must survive. And that's quite an impact speed. What was incorporated into the Rooivalk was a very strong undercarriage with huge energy absorbing capabilities. There was crushable structure under the pilots, the crew positions. And the seat, you mentioned Martin Baker. The Rooivalk has 2 Martin Baker seats. They're not ejection seats, but they are crashworthy seats. And they actually operate by having, to put it fairly simply, knives, sharp instruments cutting into a tube down which the seat mechanism falls. And by cutting it, they take the energy out and protect the crew from a very hard spike into their back. That's how it worked. Yeah, different approach.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was speaking to an American pilot, Air Force officer the other day. He didn't want to come on legacy, but I understand why. But he was complaining, I wouldn't say bitterly, because he was matter-of-factly, but he was not happy with the basic training aircraft is something that apparently called a tweet, or Tweety Bird or something, he said, a Cessna. And they sit right next to each other. And
Yes.
he says this thing, though it's a delight to fly and it's really nice, makes a huge screeching noise. But they did use it in Vietnam as well, the same way as we would have used it in Impala. But he said this thing's ejection seats were not quite up to standard. He used explosives instead of rockets. And so they said they would rather, put it down on its belly somewhere where they could than to try and eject out of it. So it's fascinating. It's an option, but it's not to say it's going to work all the time. But
I'm not an expert on ejection seats, but I do know that the original seats, as you say, were powered basically by a big gun cartridge that went off, and that imposed huge strains on pilots' backs. So a successful ejection where the pilot lived might have and did lead to him potentially having serious back problems in later life. The modern seats have softened that extraction process so that the peak G-loading is reduced and not so much damage is done to the pilot's back potentially. It's quite a serious issue.
I remember back into when they designed the first landmine-proof vehicles in South Africa.
Oh, yes.
They also looked at the force of this landmine can be on your spine because it can compress or something and then you break your spine. And so they removed. Yeah, Vernon joint. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a big player in that game. Yes.
Yeah, it's marvelous, these engineers, how they work things out. But you know what I'm thinking now about you at the test school? How did you get there? You go there by ship or could you fly? Being a civilian.
We flew. Yeah, no, we flew in a 747. It was my first flight in overseas. First time I'd ever gone overseas. 747, round the bulge in those days. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, then when you arrive there now, I suppose everything is in English. That wouldn't bother you, of course. But do they put up your wife and your family in a little cottage somewhere?
Yes. Yeah. The Boscombe, the base, Boscombe Down, they have a residential area, and we were given a duplex flat in which to stay, which was great. It was like a little village. I might have added that we had on our course pilots, engineers from all over the world, more or less. There were 2 Australians, there was an Israeli, there was an Indian, there was a Canadian, an American, South African, who else was there? A French guy, Italian guy. So it was very cosmopolitan makeup of the course. And it was like a cosmopolitan village. There's a party every Friday night, which was necessary just to take the tension off the work. But yeah, we were put up and lived very comfortably for that year period in Boscombe Down. Of course, when we got there, the embassy was meant to collect us and so on, but that never happened. So we had to make our way, find a hotel in London. We by bus. I always remember from the airport to the hotel, we climbed on this bus, but we had all our luggage. And my wife heard that you couldn't get pumpkins in the UK. So one trommel, one steel case was filled with pumpkins, which we had to load on this big red bus. So funny times, really funny times. Good stuff.
Yeah, but you graduated first in your class way too. Now my question would be again, do they then grab you and throw you in a mud pool or are they more civilized?
No. Well, it was a big celebration. There's they call it the end of course graduation. There's a big formal dinner. The chief of the Royal Air Force was there. Our ambassador, Colonel van der Lit, was there. And it's all very cultured and Koos. Trophies are handed out and the band's playing. They actually played Sari Marais as a gesture, I think. But then, because it's a huge relief for everyone, probably 1 or 2 beers more than necessary are had. And we ended up playing a game of rugby in the mess hall. So, yeah, that's typically the way people let their hair down. Yeah. So, no throwing in baths or anything like that. No.
No, I'm glad to hear that. That's actually good news. But would your pilot wings then look different? Because we had Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Passon here, and he was a flight test engineer at the SAF, and his half wing of his looked different. It was blue with a F.
Okay.
Test or
Yeah, the
something.
if I remember correctly, the SAF. This is not so in some other countries like America, but non-pilots are awarded half wings, which is just a half wing, and then their speciality or their qualification or their mustering is written with a letter, like a navigator would have an N in there. A flight engineer has an FE for flight engineer on there. So that's probably what you saw on Loris's wings. Yeah. He's a flight test engineer. Oh, yeah, and the flight test engineers had FTE, if I remember. Yeah.
But the pilot would be the same. You wouldn't know if you look at the pilot in a SAF, whether he's flying Dakotas or Mirages or whatever. He looks the same.
They're all the same. Yes. Yeah.
I want to ask you now about the BAE Lightning. I think it's a BAE. The one with the engines like this. It's weird. It's not like this. It's like this. I've heard that thing is some incredible acceleration straight up into the air. Is that true?
Oh, well,
Did they do that to you?
Yeah, it was built, it was designed, I think, probably in the 50s somewhere, late 50s. And its primary role was that of interception. The threat in those days was from Russian bombers, attacking the UK. So these aircraft were designed to get up into the area in which the bombers were operating extremely quickly. I had one flight in the Lightning, and that was, as you say, an eye-opener. I flew with a guy who was from the Falkland Islands, that's where he was. Pete Sedgwick was the pilot. He was one of the tutors on Boscombe Down. And the flight that we had was an exposure flight. Plus, we had to do a little exercise, not too technical for this program, but looking at the transonic stability of the Lightning. But that was, from my point of view, a minor issue. The general way in which these kind of orientation exposure flights are done at Boscombe is they throw the book at you. So you're scheduled for this flight, and they say the handling notes are in the library, so you have to go and get them, and you have to familiarize yourself as far as possible with the aircraft, and not being totally silly about thing. The pilot in command, the tutor, just you right, strap in and let's go. So it's checklist out, and you wade your way through, and you're then allowed to taxi the aircraft, and most of the times you're allowed to do the takeoff. But on the Lightning, it was an overcast day, and I remember Pete Sedgwick said to me, right, we're going to do a full afterburner takeoff, but the cloud base is very low. So I'm going to let you, just let this gong finish. It's 10 o'clock. Hope it's not too. It's been in the family for 100 years or so. He said the cloud base is too low. So before we rotate, I'm going to take over. That's Pete Sedgwick. I don't want you to go through the clouds because the climb angle is so steep that you won't be able to see too much on the artificial horizon. So we blasted off, well, eye-watering rate through the clouds up in no time at all, up to 40,000 feet over the English Channel. So that was an experience and a half. Absolutely. Yeah. It's still one of the quickest aircraft to height. There was an attempt a couple of years ago, you might have heard of it. I just remember very vaguely, I think it was Dave Stock from Thunder City. Do you remember Thunder City operation down in the Cape? They did a record attempt to a certain altitude. I can't remember what it was in the Lightning. And they were very, very near successful in breaking that record. Or they may well have broken it. I can't remember. But yeah, it climbs like they say a homesick angel. Yeah, really does.
Okay, but when you're way on the top and you turn, you have negative G, or is it gradual?
No, well, it depends on the flight profile. Normally, you wouldn't really push over to negative G in a normal sortie like that. So it would be a climb to the altitude and then a gentle level off. That's where we did the transonic acceleration. Yeah, in level flight.
I want to ask you a last question before we get to the Rooivalk specifics, which you guys listening here now has actually told me to ask the Colonel. But the last question I have, so I'm quite nieuwsgierig, what's the word, curious to know. If you've done a flight test, how much paperwork is involved afterwards? Do you have to write reports there and I debrief them?
Yeah, well, some people say that the output from a test pilot is actually the report. It's not actually the flying. The flying is just what leads to the report. And that's why test pilots in general on a big program, they don't accumulate too many hours, not like airline flying. As I mentioned before, there's a whole lot of test planning and paperwork that's got to be done before. There's certificates of airworthiness. They're trying to keep the authorities happy about what you're going to do. There are test cards to be prepared so that you work through each test methodically and according to a plan. It's not just, let's go and fly this thing. Each test point is defined and set up for the specific purpose that is intended. Then after the flight, there's the after-flight report, which is a fairly short report based on that flight, but doesn't go into too much detail. It would highlight some of the major findings, major concerns, and requests for data so that the preparation of the main report I mentioned earlier, the phases in a test program, and these would all lead to a thick report, kind of like that, for a particular phase, which is then a consolidation of all the findings, all the technical information, etc. So that type of work, and then of course takes a lot of time, and then of course you get to the certification stage where the test pilots are pretty deeply involved in answering what they call the means of compliance, which relate to ergonomics, to handling qualities, and that sort of thing, which is specifically answered by the test crew. So there's a lot of work before the flight, is a little bit, and then there's a lot of work afterwards. So yeah, a lot of paperwork, presentations, marketing, all sorts of things. Yes.
Do you deliberately try to stall that aircraft or do something with it to see what it does, or would the engineers work out but not to exceed speed and those things? So there's no need for that.
Okay, let's talk generally on that. There's an old saying that operational pilots fly the aircraft to the operational limits defined in the handbook, the operating handbook. Test pilots fly the aircraft beyond that limit so that they can establish the operational limit. So typically, let's take an example. The aircraft VNE, the velocity you should never exceed, is given in the textbook, but generally the testing program would test that aircraft to 1.1 times the operational VNE to make sure that any unintended excursion by an operational pilot is not going to be disastrous. So you give him a little bit of a margin operationally. So the test pilot tests beyond the envisaged operational limits. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, that's actually quite brave work, I have to say. This is fantastic. But now, we had this Rooivalk episode, and we had tens of thousands of views, and we had the one on the experimental model before it, which was also tens of thousands of views. And I'm really happy about that, guys. If you haven't seen those videos, please go and look at it. And a lot of people approached us for questions. So I'm asking you a question, so it's not to say it's me asking you.
Sure.
The first one was, this guy wanted to know how many missiles can you carry on a Rooivalk, but I think he was confused. I think he was looking at the rocket pods and thinking they were missiles, but those are not missiles, are they? Those are unguided rockets, not the same thing.
Yeah, I think, it's semantics, I guess. So they're rockets and they're missiles. Now, you could argue that a bullet from a gun is a missile, but we classify them generally as rockets. On the Rooivalk and many other helicopters, the general one in use is a 70 millimeter rocket, folding fin aerial rocket, FFAR. The ones on the Rooivalk are produced by company under Thales, the French company, and the experts in this, the Belgian company, Forges de Zeebrugge. They manufacture the FZ rockets. So the rockets with 70 millimeter, the Russians have slightly larger ones, but they're generally unguided. Generally, the later ones are laser guided or give some homing by laser. But then opposed to that, the missiles, which you call them. So the rockets would be intended for gatherings of troops in the open, soft skin vehicles, that sort of target, whereas the missile, which is a much larger piece of equipment, and it's guided by the helicopter's avionics, by a sighting system, and it's primarily aimed at destroying tanks, bunkers, and those sort of targets. So on the Rooivalk, using the FZ, just a shortening FZ-70 rockets, FZ make rocket pods if I remember, 7, 12, and 19 rockets per pod. It's selectable by the user. If I recall correctly, we had the 19 rocket pod on the Rooivalk. You could carry 4 of those. So it gives you quite a number of rockets. You can select how you want to fire them, all in a salvo, salvos of 2, whatever the selection might be for the relevant target. Whereas the missile would be 1 per target, like 1 tank. But those are the differences. The Rooivalk could carry pods of 4 missiles, the Mokopa. I'll get onto the details of that. But it was designed 4 missiles per pod, and there were 4 hard points. So at maximum, you could carry 16 Mokopa anti-tank missiles. Now, the Mokopa was never developed to be operationally used. I think it was very close to being usable. There were some test firings done after my time on the program, but because of the operation requirement, I think, having become less demanding, there was no real need for an anti-tank weapon. So those Rooivalk that went up into DRC, the Congo, were fitted with the 20mm cannon and rockets as offensive weapons. Yeah. So maybe that answers the question regarding how many of what could be carried.
Yeah, no, I think it does. Thank you for that. But now I have a question, because I was thinking, if you launch these rockets in salvos, don't they not blind you if you fly at night? I mean, it's like flames here streaming out of you.
It's a very good question. Yes. Okay. The Rooivalk flies with a night vision system, which enables the pilot to see. And it's not goggles. It's a fancy system where the images from the image intensifying tubes are projected onto a visor in front of the pilot. I never flew a night sortie with that helmet fitted, but they would cause a minimal period of vision disruption. But that is expected by the pilot, and it'll be a couple of seconds, so it's not too obtrusive. Yeah. Good question.
Yeah, fascinating. No, I'm learning here. As I'm listening to you people out there, I remember what I hear. But there was one guy who made the comment. He asked, would it not be better to upgrade the Rooivalk to perhaps a larger caliber chin gun from a 20mm up to a 30mm to get a bit of a standoff capability, and not approach the enemy too closely? Since his argument was we're shooting at you with a 23mm, and that bloody thing is really good. But I believe that a Rooivalk might be armored against it anyway.
No. Let's handle that first. The armament situation. All aircraft have to be as light as possible. That's number one. Otherwise, they can't fly. And there's a trade-off between achieving that and armoring or protecting the helicopter from enemy action. I can draw a comparison between the Mi-24 and the Rooivalk. The Mi-24, when we were looking at an upgrade program at ATE that I mentioned earlier, we found that there was close to 2 tons, 2,000 kilograms of armor plating and armor protection on the helicopter. Now, 2 tons in a 12-ton helicopter is huge. It's expendable weapons that are thrown out. It's fuel, it's range, all that sort of thing. But their approach tactically was very different to the Rooivalk. Their approach, the Russian approach, was to attack en masse, head on, a whole formation, and they expected to draw fire and to be able to survive the fire. The Rooivalk approach was very different because we decided that in order to perform the mission properly, we had a build-up of, it was like a mantra, was the first thing is avoid detection. And if detected, avoid being hit. If hit, avoid crashing. And if you have to crash, crash safely. So I've already mentioned the crash worthiness in passing a little bit earlier. And this was really one of the reasons that gave rise to the modus operandi of the Rooivalk. Fly as low as possible, avoid detection, use the cover of terrain. If detected, and you have systems on board like a laser warning, radar warning, if detected, you move out of the way. You take cover, you dispense systems which confuse what is tracking you to avoid being hit. If you hit, minimize the damage. So we had duplex systems. The engines were far apart, just for example, 2 separated hydraulic systems, 2 electrical systems, 2 crew on board, and that sort of approach. So we didn't go out to absorb fire. We went out to avoid fire. Okay. So that's a very different approach to the Russian approach. And now to answer the question in terms of 20 or 30 millimeter, I think what the person who posed the question was looking at was standoff range. Okay, now that has to be carefully considered in the mission that is being proposed. So the crew would have advanced knowledge, hopefully, of what is protecting this target that they're about to engage. And yes, ZSU 23 is a nasty piece of work, and you do your best to make sure that you know about any such system and that you're able to take means to avoid being shot down by this particular thing. So in the event of I'm talking pretty loosely generally, this type of weapon being deployed in your target area, you would then probably, had we had the weapon, switch to a system like the Makopa, which would give you a standoff range. The rockets are also deployable, fireable in a non-direct mode. In other words, you could fire them in an arc onto that particular target. They're not very accurate in that mode unless there's a laser-guided rocket, which could be used to neutralize the ZSU-23, for example. The Makopa could as well. It's very expensive to take out a single thing. So avoidance would be the first thing. Now, the standoff between a 30 millimeter, I think your listener referred to that, and a 20 millimeter in terms of range is not, I think, significant. The 20 millimeter gun on the Rooivalk is it's very capable of taking out soft skin vehicles up to 2 kilometers and possibly beyond. So that's a fair standoff range, provided that those on the ground do not have any more sophisticated weapons. So it's very much a tactical approach that needs to be taken. The major reason for going for the 2 actually, that I can pull off the top of my head, for going for the 20 millimeter is that you can carry more ammunition, more rounds for the same weight. And there was similarity between the ground forces, the Ratel's 20 millimeter gun, use the same gun. So in the field where helicopters operate, ammunition logistics become less of a problem, parts, serviceability, all that sort of thing. That was one of the factors. Coupled with accuracy, we strive to get kind of a first round hit on a target. So less accurate weapons, say for example a 30 millimeter that didn't have a targeting or a steering turret, and a sighting system that was accurate would expend more bullets hitting the target. So it just becomes less effective overall. I might say the targeting of the 20mm gun is done primarily, the accurate shooting is done using the main sight, which is stabilized and has sophisticated, what's the word I'm looking, optics to track the target. That's actually operated by the weapons system officer. I know that's another question you're going to get onto, who sits in the front of the helicopter, and he would do the targeting. He can zoom in, and the firing accuracy is very good. So all things being equal, you could probably take out a soft skin vehicle around 2 kilometers with a single burst. So that's a philosophy that was followed in general.
I saw him shooting. I was just before I left South Africa. I went to Wineland, to Switzerland. I was at the Brug, at the shooting range, and they had the night shooting. The armored people, they have this night shooting. I don't know if they still have it. But in that year, they came up with a damn surprise because they were shooting with their rifles, and that Olifantenk of them, which is magic to hear. And the next moment, it got quiet, and woof, you just see all the hell breaking loose here from the sky. And then they had the Rooivalk behind them, which they didn't tell us about. And you just see it was the most amazing sight. I wish they did tell us, because I was taking pictures. I would love to have taken pictures. It was just, you saw this streams of rockets and tracers, and the next moment it's gone, and that helicopter is gone too. You don't know where it is. It was one of the most, you know what, I felt a bit like a terrorist there. I felt to myself, oh, they must have been very brave people when you see those alloys and the gun, you know, the gunships and things coming in. So that's fascinating. That's a fascinating answer. Let's ask about who flies and who navigates and who's the weapon system officer, since we have that question coming up.
It's interesting to go back to the original layout of the helicopter. Why is it a tandem? Why the crew sit one behind the other and not side by side? This was part of our early deliberations on how we're going to lay out this machine. It would have been easy to take a Puma and just fit some weapons to it. Okay. What we decided was that in terms of the crew being able to view unrestricted, you can imagine people sitting side by side. The pilot wants to look, he's going to look past the other guy, and so on and so forth. So a tandem layout, and it was also influenced by the American experience on the Cobra and the Apache, was the best way forward. There was some controversy later years with Sikorsky, who kind of proposed their Black Hawk, the AH-64, as an upgraded weapons platform. And they were making a big go of saying there's nothing wrong with side-by-side. But that was quickly chucked out of the window, and they were never successful with that. So primarily it's the unrestricted view from the cockpit provided by a tandem layout, which also led then to, because of length and airframe length, you can't have tandem cockpits without doing something to the engines. If you look at the Mi-24, for example, the nose looks unbalanced in terms of length. It's unusual because they had the problem of the engine sitting in front of the gearbox. So you can't move the whole cockpit backwards. So from that reason, and also the spin-off from that, was survivability of the engine. So instead of the engine sitting side by side, as in the Puma, where in the event of one, let's say, exploding, it could affect the other, on the Rooivalk, they were moved to the side of the gearbox, where the engines were less vulnerable to simultaneous damage, if you put it that way. The pilot in the Rooivalk sits at the back. He's primarily responsible, and these are the tactics. I'm not sure what they've developed these days. It might be different, but just talking generally again, he'd be responsible for the safety of the aircraft for performing the mission according to whatever plan. There's some differences of opinion about who would be the aircraft commander. I think the United Kingdom on their Apache helicopters, in some instances, the weapons system officer is the commander of the aircraft. He's responsible for executing the mission. I'm not sure what is in place today in the Rooivalk, but in terms of the cockpit design and layout, the pilot is primarily responsible for flying the aeroplane, keeping it safe, and the weapons system officer in the front cockpit has access to the main sighting system. He's able to steer the sighting system. He's able to acquire the cannon to shoot in an accurate mode using the sighting system. Obviously, this is all well coordinated between the two crew. And he would be primarily responsible for firing the Makopa, the anti-tank missile, which there's quite a lot of procedural stuff that needs to go on, and it's primarily his duty then to acquire the target, make sure it's the correct target, select the missile, when ready, cooperation with the pilot to fire the missile, and then make sure that it is guided to the target. That's essentially the breakdown. It depends on the user, how they particularly want to do it, but the cockpit layout is as I've described. Yeah.
But I do recall the flight engineers telling me that they could all at least land the Alouette or whatever they had there with them. They were trained sort of, not perhaps officially, but the pilots would take care of it. Should something happen to the pilot that they can auto-rotate this thing down or at least take off or something. Some of them actually, I would say, became fairly proficient pilots, even if not. And,
absolutely correct, yes. As far as I know, the Rooivalk crew is made up of 2 qualified pilots. That's why it's part of the redundancy. So should one pilot get shot, injured, taken out, the other one can take over. Same with systems redundancy. The 2 pilots are a redundant system. Yes, very, very true.
It's fascinating to me when you started talking about sitting in tandem or behind each other. I saw a movie the other day about the US Air Force. Well, it's not a movie, it's one of their training things. And they were explaining how they got the B-52 bomber going, which is now older than us. I mean, it's a really old thing, but it's upgraded and they have money to upgrade things. And then they deliberately wanted the 2 pilots right next to each other for mutual support and so forth. And that came from the bomber barons, as they called them in the Second World War, HAP, Arnold, and those people, Mitchell. Now, fascinating to me is that it's totally a different way of flying. I mean, these things are designed to fly high and straight. And these days, you standoff weapons, while you guys are nap of the earth. You are right between the trees. So you cannot be like that. It just wouldn't work. So it was the right decision.
Yeah, it would work, but not as effectively. Yeah, you're right. The mutual support. It's nice to have a buddy next to you. But I think the advantages of a tandem far outweigh that kind of buddiness. Yeah.
Well, so I will mention something now which made my wife keep quiet, not speaking to me for at least 3 hours, my late wife. I asked her whether a helicopter or a fighter who's going to win that engagement. And I explained to her that during the Falklands War, I was told, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I was told that their way of dealing with attacking superintendents or from Argentinians would be to land their chopper and run for the nearest rock or something and just hide, because they couldn't get away from it. And now, when I spoke, of course, to the South African people, and I had a few chopper pilots and people on here, and they explained how they went up against the Impalas And they are quite adamant, if I can summarize them correctly, that no Impala or Mirage is going to shoot them down. Because it's something about the angle of attack and they being too low and too slow. And there's just not, it just cannot, it will dive into the ground. It's almost self-murder according to them. So, may I ask you now, sir, should you meet a MiG or whatever they're in the air, any fear of him, or do you think you can perhaps take him with one of your own missiles, or how does this work?
It becomes very complex. I think my first answer would be that planning a mission where you know there are going to be enemy aircraft in the air, you better make sure that you have some kind of top cover in terms of your friends, the Vlamgatte. It will be a coordinated type of mission. You need to know whether they're going to be enemy fighter aircraft in the air, because their problem is, first of all, being able to actually detect a low-flying helicopter. That's easier said than done. However, if they detect you and you don't detect them, you're in big trouble. Bearing in mind, they will be looking for you. They'll be high. They will probably be behind you. The Rooivalk has no means of, there's a big blind spot. And detecting a high-flying fighter is very difficult. Now, so the scenario could be if you out there on your own without top cover, and there are, for some reason or other, enemy aircraft in the air, you don't detect them, you're in big trouble. If you detect them, and there have been some proposals of having a rotor-mounted infrared detecting system where you could scan the sky above you and detect a fighter, but that wasn't brought to fruition. So if you detect them, you have a sporting chance. The helicopter turn rate is generally much higher than that of a fighter. So if you know where they are and you can follow them, you can possibly keep yourself out of trouble. So you would be in trouble unless you can actually spot them and plan some sort of evasive action. There are no air-to-air missiles on the Rooivalk. One could argue that if you have a means of detecting a fighter and you have an agile air-to-air missile, you could actually be in the pound seats in a helicopter, because you can turn quicker. And this is a discussion I wouldn't like to have on my own, because you need some expert fixed-wing guys on the other side to argue the point. But I would say that if you had those two things, you know where he is, and you have a capable weapon that you can point using your helmet, for example, you have a sporting chance. But he's probably got much the same equipment. He could lock on and launch and get out of the way. The best thing is don't go into an operational area like that.
Yeah.
It's an interesting development. I was half expecting someone to ask about the effectiveness of an attack helicopter in the modern world. And I think this is something that is worthy of some sort of debate. My first kind of answer would be that the modern world, with drones and technology, really puts the attack helicopter capabilities on the back burner. It becomes very much a platform that can only be used in very, very low-level operations. In other words, a couple of troops in the field running a couple of light-skinned vehicles, but no sophisticated weapons, no drones that can do enormous damage without you even knowing that they're there. So I think the tables have turned since the Rooivalk design was fixed. I fear that apart from low-level type operations, the usability of the helicopter is much reduced. Yeah, times are different, very different. I don't know whether our planners in South Africa have actually cottoned on to this sort of thing. And, the argument or the discussion could go to our defense budget. I don't know if this is something you plan to talk about. It's always interesting. What a lot of people are saying, we need money. We need to get the Gripens up and running again. And I say, why? What is the threat? It's like we've got to restore that which we had before, but no one knows what the threat is. And the simple answer is there's no threat in Africa that requires the use of a Gripen. There's no threat. What we need to, and I'm probably diverging, you can mute it out if you wish, or just cut it out later. What we need to be spending our money on is maritime aircraft. We need to protect our fisheries, our coastlines. We need to have ability to deal with disasters in the country, natural disasters. We need more helicopters, that sort of thing. But fighter aircraft beyond, say, the Hawk, I don't believe there's any use for reconstituting those forces. It's just too much money. And the effectiveness or the threat is not there. If we're going to get threatened by someone that can be counted or only counted by a Gripen, he's not going to come with 10 similar aircraft. He's going to come, there'll be Uncle Donald with a whole lot of aircraft carriers and things. You just fold your arms and say, come in. Yeah. So anyway, that's a little bit off the track, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do notice that the veterans are people who really actually care. So a lot of the times when you hear them speak, you can hear very real frustration on seeing things which they don't agree with, and which of course we don't always understand. But I do believe that the coming of age of the drones has changed warfare forever. There's no way you can just get in your tank brigade and storm the enemy. You're going to get shot out, man, before you get close. We'll need an answer to that, and I'm sure we'll work it out. But I want to ask. I've got a female watcher here, viewer. What do you call it? Viewer, and she wants to know, so how quickly can you get in and out the Rooivalk? If you have to run, let's say that thing starts burning or something happens with its hydraulics and you smell smoke and you want to get out. She's an engineer, by the way. So
Okay. All right. I think let's take two scenarios. The one would be what you alluded to, there's smoke or there's fire or something like that. I think you need to look at the fire suppression system. So the engines have a fire suppression system. You would be aware of a fire. Luckily, most of your flying will be done close to the ground. So you have that opportunity of landing as soon as possible if you think that there's going to be a major threat. So you could shut the aeroplane down, or you could get out while the rotors are still running. And getting out is quite quick. In the worst case, the side windows are explosively jettisonable, and it'd be a question of jettisoning the side panels if it was really a dire situation, and unbuckling a single point release for the harness, and then you can get out, unplug your helmet, and you're out, away and running. Yeah. Things happen higher up. There's always a fire is, the thing I think is dreaded most by all aviators, not just helicopter guys. So the issue would be how to get to the ground quickly. They don't carry parachutes routinely, so jumping out would not be the standard course unless you're possibly doing a high-level mission where the risks are such that you carry a parachute, so you could jump out if needed. But the escape route would be to auto-rotate as quickly as possible to the ground, land, and get out. So I wouldn't put a time to it. I reckon you can easily get out once you're on the ground, and the aeroplane is not going to fall over. You can easily get out in 10 seconds. I've never done it, but I reckon that's what it would be. Yeah.
This is fascinating to me. I mean, when you rotate down, do you have one eye on the speed, the forward speed? And I'm probably not speaking the right language, but you know what I mean. And
Yeah,
then to see where you're gonna land.
sure.
Um,
Yeah, well, yes, there'd be three things that come to mind. Is where you're going, controlling the rotor speed. Although if it's an emergency, you wouldn't worry too much about an overspeed. It's going to crash anyway. It gives you more, if you an engine out, gives you more recovery options at the bottom. Search for a place to land. Yeah, the speed is one aspect you'd be worried about, but you'd do a normal type flare at the bottom of whatever maneuver you choose. Land and get out.
is it possible to land in water with this thing, with a Rooivalk, that you can add these buoyancy inflators
Oh.
things on its wheels?
It was never intended. It would not be impossible. The aircraft with similar layouts, the Skorskis have big float additions on the hubs of the main undercarriage. So yeah, it could be added as a development for sure. Yeah.
We can
Sorry.
we can sit and talk here until your family clock goes another hour.
That's fine. I'm happy to talk whatever you need to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm very grateful for the time here, because we have a few questions still. One guy wanted to know what it weighs, and he suggested 8 tons. But
Yeah, he's
I
right.
think it's more than that, or is it?
Yeah, it's 8 tons is a good figure. Yeah. I think they did increase it later years, but I'm not sure of the actual final figure. Yeah. It's around about 8
I
tons.
suppose it's a loaded question, sir, because I mean, a combat weight is not the same as a factory delivery weight, or
Well, it depends.
fuel
Yeah,
and
look, if
weapons.
you talk about the maximum all-up weight, let's talk about 8 tons. I honestly can't remember whether that was increased. Something tells me that it was, maybe, but it's not. It's a class of helicopter. You know, the light attack helicopters like Tiger, like the 129, they run about 5 tons. The Rooivalks run about 8 tons. Mi-24, 13 tons. So that's the kind of weight spread that you expect. Yeah, the bigger the helicopter, the better the range, the better the stores or carrying capacity. That was one of the big advantages we had in the Australian campaign, was that we had a big helicopter with bigger range and bigger payload. The competitor, the Tiger, was a little less, but then it became all political in the final decision, as most things are.
It was totally political. I've heard that the RAF and the British Army actually wanted a Rooivalk, and then Uncle Sam had a few words to say to them, and then they changed their mind. I've heard that.
Yeah. I'm not sure how far it got. We did one demonstration to them. They sent a team out, a full team, evaluation team, and we did the evaluation down at Overberg. And their pilots were very impressed with the helicopter. But yeah, I think political pressure from the Americans. There's a little story that comes to mind. At Farnborough, one of the first 94, I think, somewhere around there, we had made arrangements with the manufacturer of the longbow. No, what am I talking about? The Hellfire missile, as a potential fit to the Rooivalk for the United Kingdom market. The weapons were delivered, and they were actually fitted to the Rooivalk and put on display. And that lasted for about a day until Uncle Sam came down and said, "Take them off." Yeah, exactly that point. Yeah, which was, yeah, okay, all's fair in love and war, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I spoke to some scientists, and I'm still begging them to come on to a show. We're trying to get the nuclear scientists on. And,
Okay.
and we had one interesting fellow there, and he said to me, "Do you know where the Mokapa missile actually come from?" And I said, "Well, I have a fair idea, but tell me." So he said to me, "Look, we are actually approached the US on Billy Goat Clinton, and we asked, can we buy the Hellfire, which is, of course, the Western anti-tank
Yeah.
weapon of choice."
Yeah.
And apparently the White House said no, they would not do that. This was just after we gave up our nuclear weapons. And
Okay.
Mr. Mandela took over, and obviously they didn't trust the former terrorist, as they call him, not me. Let's not put words in my mouth. But that's the kind of language they use. They were not impressed, and they didn't want to sell Hellfire to us. And that's when we went out and we started doing the Bazzetti 3 and the Ingwe further until it became a Makopa, which outperforms the Hellfire in every single way you can test it. And that's not me saying it, that's Jane's Defense Weekly. So,
Yeah.
so you don't agree with it?
I'm not so sure about outperforms the Hellfire in every. Look, it's a good missile, but it was never developed fully. So, yeah, I take that with a pinch of salt. You know, it's like, and people have their country pride and feelings, and they say the Rooivalk is better than Apache. That's not true. They similar capabilities. You don't want to
on the
just.
pilot.
No, well, to an extent, yeah, but you cannot take on the longbow. I mean, with its radar and that sort of thing. Their systems these days are far in advance of Rooivalk. Bear in mind, Rooivalk's basic avionics suite is, gee whiz, I suppose the design is 25, 30 years old. Components, it is obsolete.
It's a generation ago.
Easily, maybe 2 generations. So in days gone by, yeah, we were pretty much competitive, but these days, there's no way.
Yeah, this reminds me, if you have a fire in the engine and you activate those suppression things of your, will
Yes,
that engine then be shut down?
yes,
And then my question is, can you still fly
yes,
with one engine?
yes, yes. Depending on your weight, you might be able to maintain level flight. If not, you'll be able to do a precautionary landing with one engine. Yeah.
But is it possible once the engine is shut down to restart it?
Well, you wouldn't want to. If it had been shut down intentionally because of a fire, you wouldn't want to restart it. Yeah. You have the option, as opposed to, say, a passenger aircraft on a Rooivalk, to lighten the load on the airplane, you can jettison the stores. So if you, in that situation, you're going down faster than you wish, you can jettison the stores, the underwing stores. So that's an option.
That's fascinating. I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what? You wouldn't believe people know what you're talking to me today. So I got a whole bunch of WhatsApp messages here for the Colonel, which was not cleared with him before. And I just want to say to you guys here, but I did ask the Colonel not to reveal anything which we think might be secretive or still on the secret list or anything like that. So please bear with me. But the one question which came in now, which to me is interesting, is they want to know why did you go for wheels and not the skid thing? What did you do with the crashing of absorbing impact of crashing, or what's the reason?
The primary reason is maneuverability in the field, taxiing capability, towing capability, that sort of thing. Roll-off, take-off, although you can do it with skids, provided the surface is not too rough. Yeah, I think you're probably right. I speak under correction, but I guess you can design in more crash worthiness using bigger oleos and wheeled systems than with skids, but that's debatable. So yeah, taxiing, that sort of thing is much easier with, let's say, a tail wheel. You can turn much tighter. Of course, someone will argue, oh, you just hover taxi. yes, you can. If you're heavy, it's not so difficult, not so easy. If you're in a confined area with other tents and things around, it's better to be able to taxi away from them and take off in between them where you're going to cause a lot of wind damage. So there are pros and cons. I think the general trend worldwide is to go for wheeled undercarriages, not a tricycle, but a tail wheel arrangement. If you look at the Tiger, the 129, the Apache, the Bells are different. The Viper's got skids, but yeah, it's comme ci, comme ça.
Yeah, I got an interesting question here now. I'm not quite sure I understand it fully, but perhaps you can. But apparently the Canadians invented a few things in life. I didn't know that.
Okay.
And one of the things they invented apparently is on their naval vessels, they have like a system which you can winch this helicopter down.
Oh, okay.
Off sea.
Bear trap. I think they call it a bear trap.
That's correct. That's a word they say here on WhatsApp, bear trap. Would it be possible? I know that the Rooivalk can operate on our frigates. Do they have a similar system on it, or thought of getting it down onto the deck?
No, they were never in the basic design intentions of operating on maritime vessels. It wasn't part of the design. That's not to say it wouldn't be possible. I think the undercarriage is very rugged, so it would be possible, but it wasn't in the design. Yeah.
Okay, then I have this one asking me, and this is a little bit like taking your stoetbal and making it plow lands or something. I want to know, is it possible, sir, to sling something on this helicopter in an emergency? Can you hook it up like you would do with a Puma or Oryx and just drag something? Sling a cargo.
Sling the Rooivalk out?
No, the Rooivalk, use the Rooivalk as the slinger, so to speak.
It's not impossible, but again, it's not part of the basic design. The only feature which was close to that, which never got to fruition, was an emergency crew evacuation system where if your buddy helicopter went down, they could strap themselves to the oleo or the side. There's a step they could have used, and using a harness, they could have clipped themselves on. You could have flown them out. I don't know whether that was developed further, but it's certainly an idea. But cargo sling attachment, no, that was never developed. It would be, in my opinion, easily developed if that was required. The airframe is strong enough to be able to put in some extra hard points, and a sling arrangement could be done. Yeah.
Do these little wings of it, does that play any role in the aerodynamics to make the aircraft fly, or are they just there to hold the weapon systems?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And again, I relate to the Mi-24. If you have a look at the Mi-24, it's a very interesting airframe to look at. First of all, the deck is angled to the fuselage. So if you look at it from behind, it's all crooked. And the Russian philosophy was it's a gunship, you need to make it fly level. But that's just an aside. The wings on the Mi-24 are mounted with an angle of incidence to the airframe, and they do provide lift. I think a figure I remember vaguely is at cruise it's about 12% additional lift, which does make it offloads the rotor, and you gain a couple of knots if you've done all the design properly. The wing's not too draggy, and you can actually get the rotor to fly efficiently at a higher speed. But that becomes very, very technical. This was envisaged earlier on the Rooivalk program, particularly with the two J helicopters that I mentioned, the 189, 190, where we mounted wings. But that was tossed out because of the issues that I've just kind of highlighted, that it wasn't going to, according to the aerodynamicists, give us any great advantage. So they are essentially low drag weapons beams, no incidents, There is an effect, however, on, if you can imagine the helicopter in the hover, there's a downwash, down force on the wings. The plan view of the wing, the rotor wash impinges on that, and you do lose a little bit of lifting capability because of that. But other than that, they low drag weapons beams. That's what they are. Yeah.
Oh, this is fascinating. Then I really have a last question here because we're never going to stop, which is fascinating.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to talk.
Yeah, no, but we will invite you back, so you don't have to. We'll definitely. But I want to know if you fire these systems, the cannon or the missile, well, the rockets, is it a button on your yoke? What do you call that thing?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
does it have a safety catch on it? So I mean, do you need to
Yes.
click something?
Yes. Now, okay, it's amazing what comes to mind, and you can talk long and quite detailed. The Rooivalk was designed what we called, and is a copy from the fixed wing side, where a philosophy, they called it HOTAS, HOTAS, which is hands on throttle and stick. Okay, we converted that to hands on collective and stick, HOCAS. So the intention was to provide as much functionality to the pilot as he might require in flight, using buttons or controls on both the collective and the cyclic stick. The cyclic is the one controlling the pitch and roll of the aircraft. Answer the first question, yes, both the WSO and the pilot have the ability to launch weapons, generally speaking. And that is via a trigger on the cyclic control. There was quite a long debate, I remember, as to whether this would be a guarded switch or not. One argument was for the pilot, one of the employment, the uses of the cannon was in a quick reaction protection mode. In other words, to describe it, you're flying along nap of the earth, and suddenly you see an enemy of some sort or some target, which is a threat, and you want to take it out as quickly as possible. The pilot could acquire the gun, and it would be slaved to his helmet, and he'd look at the target, and he could fire using the HOCAS, the control, the trigger on the cyclic. And that argument said, you want to shoot very quickly, you don't need a trigger. You're in a war situation, you don't care if you have a fire. If you fire at some unintentional target, it's a war zone. Others would say, oh no, we've got to be very safe in this whole thing. You've got to have a trigger guard. And that's what was finally implemented. We erred on the side of safety. I say erred, I don't believe that. I would have liked a less guarded switch so you could act more immediately. I think in today's scenario, that's probably gone out of the window, because I don't think you're going to encounter such things generally in the employment of the helicopter. Yeah. Good question, though. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems I have a bit of a technical guy here. He wants to know if a 20mm of yours is cocked electrically or what, or how do you make it fire before you take off or later?
No, you only cock and arm the weapon once you in either in the safe area of let's say a weapons range, or whether you cross over into the red territory of where you can fire. Yes, you then cocked electrically. Yeah.
And that's how you shoot it then. Oh, wow. This is fascinating to me. Then there's a question which I'm not sure we're able to answer, but this one wants to know your electronic countermeasures on a Rooivalk. Let's say in your time, I don't know what it is today, and I don't want to know. But would that be fully automatic so that it would deploy flares and chaff and electronic means? Oh.
Yeah. Okay. The detection systems were a laser warning. So they had laser detections, all quadrants, and radar detection as well. Now each of those require different responses. So the radar, there's a chaff and flare dispenser mounted in the tail boom, which can dispense either chaff to nullify any radar threat, or flares to nullify any missile kind of threat. The laser warning is just a warning that you are being targeted, and there's nothing much you can do about it except get out of the way. And that goes back to, if seen, and that's when you are seen, you've got to get out of the way. You've got to go look for a small hill or something to get behind. That's the thing. So yeah, chaff and flare, I don't know what they've developed these days, but that would be the primary kind of response. Could be either automatic, particularly for the radar. I think they had means of classifying the immediacy of the threat, and if it was immediate, it would dispense automatically, according to what the threat is. Yeah, generally speaking, that is. Yeah.
Now I want to know, how quick can you refuel this helicopter? Because it took quite a time to refuel like something like a Puma. It's a lot of fuel.
The Puma had, there we go. It's the hour. I'll just let it finish. It's a long one. Okay. The Puma and the Oryx had gravity refueling. So there are two fuel inlets, one to each of the main tanks, and that took a while. Yeah. The Rooivalk had pressure refueling. So if you had the equipment on the ground, let's say you were at a forward air base where they had a Bowser, a fuel Bowser with pressure refueling capability, you could cut down the refueling time considerably. In a single point, you dial in what fuel load you want, and the system would then automatically deliver the fuel to whatever tanks are best filled first, and top it up to the level you want, and off you go.
The one thing which I always noticed of you chopper pilots and flight engineers is that you have no sense of humor about your fuel. I'm sure as hell I've seen people put the entire face into that aviation drama fuel to look at it, but they even sniff at it. I think I even try and drink it or something before it goes into the hello or whatever is standing there next to our captain. What's that about? Why?
Yeah, it's where's the fuel being stored? If it's in drums, how's it being stored in drums? Out in the field, you probably most of the time get fresh fuel delivered in 200-liter drums. Okay, they should be properly sealed, and they should, if they've been stored in the ground for a while, they should lie in a certain way so that there are two plugs. There's the main drain plug, and there's a little air plug. One of those should never be on the top, because it's a possible entry point for water vapor. So what the guys look for, you'll find the flight engineers run around with a little torch, and they look into the barrel. They'd go through a whole process. What are the dates on the fuel? Where's it come from? How suspicious are you? It always pays to be very suspicious. And they look in the drum of the torch. You can see if there are droplets of fuel, and you'll see whether there's any other sediment or whatever in the barrel. And what they're looking for is obviously clear fuel, no hint of water. There are test kits that you can use as well. You can take a sample which would show whether there's any moisture in the fuel. So yeah, we are pernickety. It then would run through the refueling system, which also has a filter on it to make sure that nothing gets into the aircraft tank.
The rotor, I know the rotor blades on the Puma has some kind of a thing there which you can look at it from the ground and see if there's something wrong with it. There's some coloring.
Oh, yeah.
Is it the same on Rooivalk?
No, no. Those are early blades. Those were blades with a metal spar, aluminium spar, special extruded aluminium. And the internal, it was a D structure, D segment of the main spar, which was then pressurized with nitrogen. Okay. And they had a little indicator at the root of the blade, which was called BIMS, a blade inspection method. And if there was any crack in that main spar of the rotor blade, the pressure would drop and you'd get a red indication on the blade. So since then, composite blades have taken over. So there's no main spar, metal main spar. The blades are much more rugged, much less susceptible to what's the word I'm looking for? I think my brain's getting fuzzled. Fatigue damage. So yeah, that doesn't exist anymore. The blade inspection method, the modern rotor blades, they've got almost infinite life, apart from any serious damage. But, yeah.
My late wife, after she left the Navy, was a computer programmer, and she programmed flight simulators for the US Navy.
Yeah.
And she said she wrote a program for the US Marines, who she rated quite highly, to land in dust-out conditions, in brownouts, they call it. Because they seem to have a problem with these Cobras or these, that they would flip it when they come down and you cannot see, which I suppose is disorientating. I'm sure as a pilot you can tell me. But do we have that problem with a Rooivalk too, sir, that it's perhaps too narrow and it's easy in those conditions?
Okay. Let's start at the beginning. Brownouts are a serious problem. So dust envelops the whole helicopter. And the pilot just loses all visual reference to the ground, and it's quite possible if that happens and you a little bit higher than you wish to be, you'd want to approach so that if there's a dusty area, that you reduce your speed and you keep that dust pocket behind you until the last minute where you can touch down. If you're unable to do that, you're in a bit of a problem. You basically, you can't see where you're going. I'll get on to what is possible on the Rooivalk. But in terms of the stability on the ground, it may be, and I don't know the answer, it may be more stable and less prone to a rollover than a skidded aircraft. It would depend on the width of the touchdown, the wheels. I'm not sure of those dimensions. But it becomes a problem. And I can relate to the Mi-24, which is a very unstable undercarriage system. If you look at an Mi-24 landing, its main wheels are kind of canted inwards. And if you land without taxiing forward, the system becomes very wobbly. And a brownout in that situation could quite easily cause the Mi-24 to roll over. Mitigating that, I've already mentioned the landing technique. Just keep forward of the dust following you, which is difficult at night, for example. The Rooivalk had a feature, or has a feature, where if you're in that situation, you can push a button and it will hold the hover for you, based on its internal systems, its gyros and so on. So it would establish that hover for you. And you can be moving sideways, forward, and push that button, and it would capture it in terms of height and position. And you could then try and sort yourself out. Once you level, you have the option of just flying forward, which is a pretty simple thing. Or if you're feeling brave, you can gently come down on the height and touch down. You have to have that feature to assist you. And that was, I think it was an integrated Doppler versus inertial system, which would determine the position of the helicopter. and then the radar altimeter would determine the height. So you could land almost blind in those conditions.
So there's no need for a weapon system officer in the front to open the side window or door and lean out there like they would do in a LO. Or
No, that LO thing, it's often quite amusing. It's such a standard operating procedure. You know, I often have a chuckle. You see them landing at Squadron on the runway, and the flight engineer's got his door open, and you say, okay, fine, maybe they need fresh air in the cockpit, but yeah, not really necessary. Sure, when you're landing in the bush, it's obviously vital to have that. The Rooivalk, you've got rear view mirrors, which if you know how to use them, and you're an astute pilot, you can plonk it down with care in a confined area. It's possible. Yeah.
3-point landing or first on the front legs and then down? What's the best?
Look, it depends on the loading of the aircraft, the longitudinal center of gravity. So in some cases you could be hanging in that attitude, in some cases you'd be hanging like that. Very seldom would you be like that. So the other factor is, as in most helicopters, the tail rotor. In still wind conditions, they hover one wheel low. Okay. So generally under middle CG conditions, no other factors, you probably touch down slightly right wheel first, then the left wheel, then the tail wheel. Yeah. If you do a roll-on landing, you can a low-speed roll-on landing. You can touch down both simultaneously and then slowly let the tail drop. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen that. So you mean that you're coming like an aircraft, like a fixed wing, and you
do a slow roll-on, yes.
Yeah.
That would typically be, let's say you're very heavily loaded and you want to do a roll-on on a runway. That would be ideal. You don't want to get your rotor speed too low in the worst-case scenario. So you could do a slow roll-on with on the main wheels. Yeah. Tail will touch after.
Is it possible that ground effect can get hold of you? So if you're coming in and the next moment there's just no power and you go down?
Okay, that would be an overpitching condition where you basically messed up the approach and you're coming in at too high a descent rate. You could have not enough power to actually arrest the descent rate. It wouldn't be a loss of ground effect. It would just be that you're putting too much requirement on the rotor and the engines, in fact, to arrest the descent. Yeah, it has happened.
I've heard the Impala pilots, and some of them who flew in the back of the Impala, complain most bitterly. They say the sun would get them from the top and then the feet is freezing downstairs. I don't know what else was freezing. They were complaining bitterly. But I do know that the Rooivalk also has big windows. I mean, does it get warm in that thing?
Yeah, there's a air conditioner on board. Yeah, and there's an overhead sliding curtain, so you can take out some of the sun. Obviously, there's always going to be some coming in from the side, but there's very little it can be. There is air conditioning.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
How quickly, sir, can you start the Rooivalk up, the engines?
Ooh, there were tests done on just that. You can do a double engine start, so you can. I know there were tests done. I can't remember the values, but you can probably, if you a well-prepared crew, and you just want to get the aircraft airborne, you're not worried about getting, let's say, the main site on board or online yet. You can probably get airborne in 2 minutes. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the figure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quick. That's quick. I have a very last question for you. So otherwise, the problem with us here is that we can only edit that long before our computers start taking stress. And I do believe you're going to come back. Do you have any advice, sir? If there's a young man listening to us now here and he wants to become a pilot or perhaps even dream of being a test pilot, any advice
Sure.
to a youngster here?
How old is the youngster? How old is the youngster?
Let me ask. Um,
Or
15,
if you,
15 years old.
oh, okay. So he's still at school. Yeah, okay. Concentrate on your physics and your maths. If you've got geography, it also helps. Work hard. But then the problems become real. Where do you actually go for training? And I don't know whether I've got any advice these days. The best training, the cheapest training would be in one or other air force. I'm not sure where your viewer is in the world, but first choice would be to go to an air force where you get very good training at minimal cost. If you've got to pay for it yourself, it's very expensive. But get the first foot in the door, get your physics and your maths up to date, and yeah, work hard. Keep fit. Yeah, don't smoke.
And I suppose don't get drunk to a pilot, to a cockpit.
No, you can, yeah, exactly.
I've heard about a few pilots who were having a bit of a braai and the next moment they were called out. That was in Rhodesia. And they said they don't really remember flying that well that day, but they flew very bravely, apparently.
Yeah.
These things
All
happen.
right. They happen. Unfortunately, they do. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much, Colonel. I really appreciated your time. And to all
Yeah,
of you out there, guys, please come and talk to us. Come and talk to us.
okay. No, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I really enjoy answering questions like come from your viewers. It's very interesting to see the feedback, and anytime. And as I said earlier to you, it's all in the interests of preserving some sort of history. And thank you for that. Appreciate it. Thanks, Koos.
Thank you, sir. God bless.
I'm Phil Skellen. I'm the president of the NEC of the Friends, and I also serve on the Museum Council since 2008. I'm also a military veteran. I served in 3 SAI in the 70s and 80s. I am here to tell you a bit about the Friends. The Friends is an organization that is actually a force multiplier to the museum staff, and we're here to provide assistance in restoring aircraft, maintenance to the museum, and also to guide the public around the museum. We occupy the museum on a Saturday that the museum staff can have a day off and they don't need to be here. And that's what we basically do. In these functions, we identify projects and we obviously commission projects and we do them. We raise funds by various means, mainly selling beverages and food on flying days and on museum days. And that's our main source of income. And that's basically what the Friends do. We also hold regular meetings and we get people with stories to tell around the SAF or around aviation, and that attracts quite good crowds. And we also publish a quarterly journal, and that's mainly aimed at the SAF history or aviation history in general. We always need like-minded people to volunteer to assist us. We give training, and we also, for school kids, we also can help them with their community projects, that we can sign forms for their community hours. And we also need any donations of old books, aviation books that go into the library. We currently have a library project, and we need all the help we can get. We need donations, be it in kind, be it in finances, that can help us finish the projects that we take on behalf of the museum. We have a website. It's www.fsaafm.com. That stands for Friends of the SAF Museum, obviously. And you can contact us there. On there is all the details. And you can get membership forms on the website. We also have, you can look us up on Facebook. All the branches have a Facebook presence, and that's where you can find us. Yes, we're looking forward to hosting you at our museums, and please come up and introduce yourselves, that we can give you a guided tour of all our artifacts, all the jets, all the transport aircraft, the Shackleton, and the helicopters, and so on.
Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to receive notifications.